Good evening, everybody. So sweet of all of you to be out here tonight. Just wonderful that you're taking some time tonight to discuss this very, very important issue. I want to let you know, I'm, for those who don't know me, although I know most of you, I'm Reverend Rachel McGuire, pastor here at Emmanuel Baptist Church. And, Eloise and I have been talking about this for a long time, and it's a very, very special night. And Eloise has put just enormous work, and I'm just completing a major written work, and so I have folks like Hava who are doing the same thing. We know what writing is like, and maybe many of you do too. It's not for the faint of heart, and when Eloise told me that she was intending to write this book, I support her 100%, but in my heart I'm thinking, this is a very hard thing to do. And when she came forth with this beautiful manuscript and followed through, it's just amazingly impressive what she's accomplished. I'll give you a little sense of the format for tonight. Maybe that'll be helpful to you. The way it's going to work, I'm just going to give you a couple little introductory remarks, and then our speaker will come forward, and she's going to speak with you for about 10 to 15 minutes, something like, would you say, Eloise? And maybe could go to 20, but yeah. And then we're going to call forth our three panelists who will give some response to what they've heard from Eloise, and then we will also open it up to all of you for some dialogue. And we have some wonderful panelists tonight, and I think this will be an opportunity for some really important conversation. The heart of this is that we're dealing with a subject that's incredibly difficult. And so as we see this tonight, not as a space where we have all the answers, but just a space for dialogue and discussion and conversation about the nature of the predicament. And it's very, very important that we hear about that predicament from people who experience it directly, the experience of the safety net or lack thereof. And if you'll indulge me, there's a scripture that I think of often, and actually I think of this often when I think of Eloise and the 7 years that we've spent together dialoguing on these subjects. And it's from the Gospel of Luke, and it's often referred to as the story of the persistent widow. Many of you are shaking your heads already who know and love Eloise. But let me read it for you, and let's just make a comment or two, and then we'll move forward. Oh, and I just wanted to let you know, after the panel, first of all, we're going to close with a beautiful song that we heard rehearsed before all of you arrived. And so we'll try to wrap up. We'll try to get them going about 8:20, so the whole thing will go an hour and a half tonight. If it gets to be about 8:20, somebody flag me because I have no sense of time, and we'll move to our closing song and wrap up the evening, okay? All right, so here's the story of the persistent widow. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not lose heart. And he said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, grant me justice against my opponent. For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. Now, actually, this has been a very uncomfortable passage for biblical interpreters to interpret because they're so in the habit of taking the male patriarchal figure and interpreting that figure as God, which is almost 100% in error at interpreting any of Jesus' parables. But it's just such a cultural habit we have that we misunderstand the parables all the time. And so the judge is clearly not God in this case, someone who doesn't even care about God or care about people. And then they've softened the language. It actually says that she may not blacken my eye, is pretty much what the Greek says. But interpreters have softened that through the ages because it's an uncomfortable parable. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. Will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? And I mentioned that I've been writing, and this parable figured prominently in my writing, and my understanding of this parable, and even more deeply, my whole understanding of the nature of salvation has changed over time. And, Eloise has played a part in that change by living for me in many ways as that persistent widow that bangs on the door and cries out for justice. And what I've come to understand about salvation in many ways is that we often, because we have been shaped by imperial thinking, and a thinking that involves dominance and subordination, and our minds are so completely colonized into this hierarchical version of reality that we've constructed together, that we just think that justice is going to come by us helping some people that are struggling and pulling them into our imperial structure. Because we're comfortable, for those who are comfortable in the structure, that kind of makes sense. Well, we'll just help everyone get comfortable in the structure. But most of us that have done any analysis at all know that that's never, ever going to happen, because the structure is entirely dependent on, 80% of the world being an underclass that's exploited for labor, and the earth being exploited for resources. The whole structure is condemned to fail by the way it's structured, which means we need a different structure. And what I came to see about what Jesus, I think, is talking about, and all through Luke, people are banging on doors. The guy comes at night in the neighborhood and in the village and bangs on the door. And, one message is persistence for the people who are not making it. But the other message is for the people who are in the houses, or in the enclaves, or are safe in the structures. That it's the people who are outside the structures that are saving us. Right? So this really reorients our understanding of salvation. It's not that we're pulling people into our structures. It's that we're being called out by the vast majority of this world out of our structures into new answers, into new solutions. And I think when we're in our enclaves, when we're in our bubbles, we don't realize that there's this huge wealth of knowledge and capacity and solution making out there in the world. So this night is in many ways in honor of that understanding and commitment that we need to let ourselves be, I call it the irritating relentlessness of human dignity. Right? Like, let's let that human dignity just knock on our doors. Let's hear what we may be missing so that we can be pulled out of our enclaves and find new structures, new solutions, new possibilities for justice that can hold all of humanity and not just a tiny percent of humanity. So that's the spirit with which we come to the evening. And so tonight we're going to hear from Eloise Johnson. She's an educator, she's an activist, she's a gadfly glorious, she's an author. And I thank you, Eloise, for knocking on my door. So why don't you go ahead and...
Thanks so much for coming tonight. I want to start by saying that it's been said that nothing in life worth having comes easy. But on my journey, I say there's much in life. I didn't know I was going to cry. That should not be so hard. And most of my life, I tried to contain my anger and be quiet. But eventually, I learned that anger can be a great motivator to get something done. And my anger came out once when I heard a spokesperson on TV say that he wasn't much for boosting the minimum wage, but he did believe we should have a safety net. And I shouted at the TV, but there's no safety in our safety net. And that's how I came about for the theme of tonight. When I hear the expression safety net, I get the word net, and it has a lot of holes in it. In fact, one person in recovery did say to me today, why don't we just forget the safety word? So he kind of got the same idea that I did. But I don't get the word safe in the word safety net, because safe means protection, free from harm, injury, or risk. And I learned about how unsafe our safety net was by going through divorce court abuse. I was tossed out on the streets one night because the doors were locked, and I was fighting my battle to keep the home that I had, because I had a great home daycare, and it was really a school. And I was doing it for 3 or 4 years steadily. And I can honestly say every single child who came to me, even those considered mildly retarded, ended up being considered a brain. So I loved what I was doing, and I loved opening the minds of children. This was my gift. So when I lost this, and I was standing on the street, and it was at 12 Corners in Brighton, I was thinking about the millions who were tossed like this before me in the name of justice, which was injustice, and the millions who would come after me. And I stood there thinking, how long would a person have to be homeless before they would lose any sense of how to get back into some kind of comfortable, safe life? Fortunately for me that night, my son had enough money so I could stay in a motel. But the following night, I had to think about where I was going and what I was going to do. And fortunately, I had some great friends who let me stay with them for over a month. And at that time, I was going out looking for a place of my own. And everywhere I went, because the only money I had right now was the alimony money, the landlords told me that they couldn't count that as safe money because the courts could stop the alimony any time. And I really understood the plight of the landlords, because they've got to pay their bills too. In fact, the only place that told me that the alimony money was mine was the IRS. And when I think of the word alimony, and I was so abused by this man, especially financially, and they're telling me that this is supporting me when it's not enough to live on, I think that when someone's hurt someone, they should have to pay a debt. So I think we really have to start looking at how we're helping the oppressor far too much instead of the oppressed in our justice system. It took me about a year or so before our other house was sold. And the reason why it was taking so long was because some people from another country were getting a special grant to buy this house, while I was losing the very house I slaved to get. And it's not that I don't want people to get help, but there's something wrong with the picture. So after I got the money from when that house was sold, I right away paid off my attorney's fees, which was an entire year of what I would be making in the daycare. And I took the other money and I put it on a owner-financed home. And when you buy a home that's owner-financed, you're going to pay more for it. And the house was in need of much repairs, but I thought, who's going to sell me a house without a job? And I wanted to get this home so I could start up my daycare again. And I rented to some friends on and off, and I had 2 children that I knew that I was caring for, and along with the alimony, it was helping me to pay the bills. And I had like 4 or 5 women going through divorce court abuse at the same time, and I'd have potlucks every 6 weeks, and they'd come in and they marveled at the repairs that were taking place in the house. And of course, I was getting this help from generous handymen who didn't have that much money themselves. And so we're learning that somehow there's philanthropy even with the dire poor, but they're not waiting until they get a ton of money to help. And then a friend came by who knew 3 languages after I was living there almost 3 years, and he said he didn't have the words for how I repaired this place. And then 3 years afterwards, when I'm pretty close to getting the house together, I get a summons, and it says on the summons that my ex-husband and his new wife both lost their jobs at the same time, the same job, same company, so they'd have to be taking away the alimony earlier. And because I lost the second house, that was my hopes for losing the daycare. And I couldn't afford health insurance for the first time in 8 years since the divorce. I was paying for it myself. and I have this severe nerve damage in my neck. And over the years now, I have 3 different kinds of nerve damage. And when people ask me why I think I have this nerve damage, I say because I have a lot of nerve. And I get such a pain in my neck sometimes that it's really a royal pain. And I know that sometimes I can pass that pain on to others. So I worked and I accepted when I got on the disability, which I really didn't want to do, but my doctor insisted. In fact, I kept saying, no, I don't want it, I don't want it, where most people have to fight for years to get on. They threw it at me. They sent me a letter and said, it's yours, use it. And I got this letter along with this card that has the word benefits on it. And the letter tells me that I will be living on $636 a month, and the most I can have for food stamps is $12. Well, I didn't want the food stamps. I wanted what was stolen from me in the first place. And at that time, a studio would cost $500, and then I would be paying the utilities on that. And with my 636, I couldn't really get a place to live yet. So I would live in different homes. I'd go to different homes and rent rooms. That's what I was doing. But with the word benefit, when I saw the word benefit on the card, I was livid because benefit means an advantage or profit gained from something. Benefit is synonymous with good, well-being, comfort, ease. And everything that was happening to me was the complete opposite of these words. Politicians like using words like safety, benefit, entitlement under the guise of help, when in actuality that help does not help us to rise up. It just keeps us simmering. If I didn't lose my house in the first place, I wouldn't have needed those entitlements. Entitlement means to give a person or thing a title or claim to something. The best the entitlements did for me was to give me a life of poverty. One time I did go to an agency to find out about subsidized housing. And when I went to the building that I was sent to, it was a freezing cold day, and there were a lot of broken people walking outside back and forth. And I had to ring the doorbell for 10 minutes before I could get into this agency. And I remember them opening the door, and there were these steep stairs and all this clutter all around the stairs. And I'm walking up the stairs, and I'm thinking, well, what am I getting myself into? And my heart was aching because I'm aesthetically inclined, and I'm walking up these stairs thinking, if this is all that can be offered to the most broken, how are they going to believe that they deserve more, that they're worth more? Well, when I met with the woman, she was very nice, and she explained to me that because I had to go bankrupt with the second house, I would probably have to try at least 2 times to be able for her to help me. And so she suggested that I go to a shelter first, that would speed things up. Well, if I thought climbing up those stairs was crazy, going to a shelter was even crazier. So I went into the shelter, and it was co-ed. It was all dusty and dirty and all gray. All the colorings were gray. And it was near night, so they brought me to my room, and there were other beds in it, and there was a mattress, and it was plastic, and it was all ripped and torn and broken. And then he just had one thin sheet to go over it, and then a blanket to go over you. And the pillow was plastic, but there was no pillowcase. And if you wanted to take a shower, you couldn't lock the door, even though it was co-ed. And then they had strange things like words like violation, roll call, and you'd wake up in the morning with this unbelievable loud alarm that sounded like a prison alarm. And these are all prison terms. Wherever I am, I'm always analyzing for the whole picture. I'm not looking at what I'm going through as much as studying it, and that's what saved me all these years. So, and if you overslept, you got a violation. If you didn't get the roll call on time, you got a violation. And if you got 3 violations, you were kicked out of the shelter. And I did oversleep one night. And a person stood over me. "You've committed a violation." She's just standing over me, waking me up with this horrible sound. And I had a car at that time, so I asked the people, because they can't be in the shelter all day, I asked them, what happens when the weather's bad? They said even if it's a blizzard, they have to be outside. And shelter means a safe place, especially in bad weather. And again, it's the complete opposite of what the politicians are selling to the people who want to believe the people who were taken are the takers. So this was the things I was waking up to. And I remember calling my doctor and saying, "Oh my God, they don't spend trillions to keep people in poverty, they spend billions." And I believe that an economic theory that includes economic poverty, which causes human suffering, be it mental or physical, that hinders the healthy growth of human beings, is a failed system. And so far, because we've always had poverty, we still have a failed system. And today, in this age of technology, where everybody's getting these great innovative ideas, surely we can find a way to put our heads and hearts together to find a world where we can finally end poverty. There's a bumper sticker that I really like, and it says, "Feed the roots, they trickle up." And I remember the first time I ever rooted a plant. I went to my friend's house, and she had a ficus tree. And I said, "I love your tree." And she said, "Take a clipping, go home and, root it." And I could never root anything with my ex. So I'm trying it, but I'm figuring it's not going to happen. And I had it in a clear glass of water. And little by little, the roots were growing. And I was telling my friends, "Look at the roots, look at the roots." But I was also identifying with my roots. That's why this meant so much to me. And finally, the roots got so huge in the glass that a friend of mine took it and put it in a pot. She said, "Enough." And then another friend came by, and he told me that when I water a plant, I've got to make sure that I get the water down to the roots, because if I don't, it won't grow healthy. And then he said, if I put too much in, then the roots are going to rot. And then he said, if I don't put enough in, you're not going to have a stable grounding for the plant. Well, just this example of how a plant grows shows how stupid the trickle-down economic theory is. The people who have been taken, it just feels like this drip, 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 and it doesn't go any farther than pestering your mind. And all my life, I can honestly say, through all the abuses that I have had, I always walked away and never said a word about it. But when I had my home daycare and I was so dedicated to the woman and children, with the divorce court abuse, I just couldn't back down on the injustice here. And I remember sitting in the judgment seat, and I thought I would be writing a book on how the young child's mind works. But I'm sitting there going, oh my God, this is it. This is what I need to do. So my whole passion switched when I was going through these abuses and intimidations in the divorce court system. And while I've been going along fighting with this passion all these years, on the one hand, I'd hear people say, "Take a stand for justice and never back down." And the other crowd would say, "Let it go, get out of the past, get on with your life." But what the latter people don't understand is that people like myself who take a stand for justice and insist and persist for the good of all our citizens, we are getting on with our life. And when you think about it, divorce court abuse is really an extension of domestic abuse. And since we already have a month for speaking out on domestic abuse, why not tag divorce court abuse right along with it? I have been trying for 25 years to get politicians to help me with this, and they all say there's nothing I can do. So I think this would be a simple solution, because then we could be talking about both ends. And And the survivors are being told a lot that they have to face reality, that this is the way it is, and you better start going along with the way it is. But I say it's the leaders and politicians who have to face reality. And that reality is that we do not have a safety net. What we have, what I learned on this journey, is a survivor's trap. And sometimes that trap can be so tight that people actually choose to end their lives. And I'll end by saying, I kept hearing, money talks. Well, tonight, money or no money, let's talk. And I'll leave that to Rachel and the three wise men. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Eloise. Great job. I'd like to invite our panelists to come forward. So Reverend Dick Myers, Mike Boucher, Brian Hetherington. Eloise refers to us as Rachel and the three wise men.
And I want to say one thing about the fight history. My fight history is up to the ceiling. My fight history is up to the ceiling in my house because of my friend Judy and the white hair over there. She took care of it all those years for me. So it's just amazing that that's the only thing I have left.
So I think these guys need no introduction, but just so you know, Reverend Dick Myers is pastor emeritus here, my predecessor, and ongoing. We never let him stop working. We just stopped paying him here at Emmanuel. And Mike Boucher, clinical social worker at Spiritus Christi Mental Health Center. Is that correct? At St. Joe's Neighborhood Health Center. Anything else you want? These guys do everything in the community, as you know, and are deeply involved in these issues. Brian Hetherington, Chief Counsel of Empire Justice, and many, many more things. But I won't take a lot of time going through all that. We thought that they would be excellent respondents to Eloise's work because we're in it all the time, and they're in it all the time. And so I want to give them a little chance to respond and spontaneously from what Eloise has shared. And then we'll ask some questions, and we'll also give a chance for you all to get involved in the conversation, too. And we'll start with Dick.
Well, Eloise, thank you. I don't know why I'm sitting here with the other two wise men. But I think maybe those of you who have just heard this talk will recognize that Eloise has the capacity to break, as Rachel put it, our epistemological bubble. The fact that our minds have been occupied by a whole way of thinking that needs to be changed. And so Eloise kind of specifically took on the word benefit, for example, and said, what does it really mean? Or what does safety really mean? And what does shelter really mean? We really have the resources in our society to end poverty. We really do. But what we have is a system that's been cobbled together sometimes for the benefit of the professional servers of the poor. And people like Eloise end up losing. The wonderful thing about Eloise is that she has done an enormous amount of work on her life, and she's articulate, and she can unwrap this in a way that a lot of people cannot. And I'm very thankful for that. If we could just turn that into a salary. And that's part of our problem, because we value some things enough to pay for them, and we don't value other things that are more important. And so the whole thing's a real mess. So this is just my initial response to what you've offered, Eloise. Every time I sit down with you, I learn something more, and I'm very thankful for that, and thank you for what you've offered.
And I also want to thank you, Eloise, because I think it's very brave to stand up and share stories, and you know, very many people who have faced the experiences that you have faced are afraid of sharing those stories, don't believe anybody would want to hear those stories. And yet those stories challenge us profoundly. And I think, Dick is absolutely right. We can end poverty. We came very close to ending elder poverty in this country. Poverty's constructed. It's constructed out of a series of rules. It's what we decide as a society that we are going to create as the rules for our society, the benefits that people are going to receive, and what they have to do or be or whatever to get those benefits. And, even places that are as conservative as England have made great strides in ending child poverty. Both, liberal and conservative governments have decided that that makes a lot of sense, and let's do it. Is it that we don't have enough resources? Well, heck no. I mean, we have plenty of resources, which if properly distributed, which doesn't even mean equally distributed, just, properly distributed, could mean that everybody could live in dignity. And if everybody lived in dignity, they'd live in more stability, and they would be much better able to make their own way, to make their way off of this platform. And this isn't even like some wildly crazy liberal idea, although there's nothing wrong with wild, crazy, and liberal ideas, mind you. But Utah, that bastion of liberal political thought, has rethought what they're doing with folks who are homeless. And they basically said, well, folks who are homeless are going to have a really heck of a time moving past being homeless if they're in these totally unstructured places and like that. And so how do we create stability and dignity and like that? So I think what you're saying to us really challenges us, Eloise, to think about how do we create stability and dignity for everybody, so then everybody can move ahead from this platform of stability and dignity to the best that they can, and in doing that, move us along collectively much further than if we continue these vast disparities and, embrace trickle-down theories and leave 30, 40% of our population so far behind that they can't really contribute what they would otherwise be able to contribute because they're spending all their time and all their energy working on these sort of Maslow first-tier safety, where's my next meal coming from, where am I staying tonight, kinds of issues.
Thanks. Thanks, Eloise. Probably the only reason I agreed to be on tonight's panel was I get to sit next to three amazing people. But I'm well aware, and I don't know if this was intentional, but Eloise wanted so-called experts, I think.
Guys that are socially acceptable in the system.
Okay.
I'm not there.
Right.
I have no thing, so they see me as nothing.
Right, and
Scamming with faint praise.
what I want to make sure I say is what Eloise said should be enough to convert you.
Yeah.
Nothing we say should be enough to convert you. And so I almost don't want to say any more, because if her speech doesn't tell you what needs to be said, then no idea is going to do that for you. Relationships convert us. Do you want to know how to fix the system? Spend more time with Eloise. You'll figure out how to fix the system. Spend the time with the people who are on the outsides. I mean, that is the history of the prophet in Hebrew Scriptures. It is only the one on the outside who can tell you how the system works. Because if it works for you, see, the system works for me every day. Works for me in ways I will never even begin to appreciate. There are doors opening for me. There are people I am stepping on who I think are mats at some level, metaphorically speaking. So I just need to come clean about that. And that there are people like Eloise who I need to stay close to help me figure out, for example, sexism. There are people like Eloise who I need to stay close to help me figure out the legal system. There are people like Eloise that I need to stay close to help me figure out discrimination or neck pain or any of these other things. And when I first I met Eloise, I don't even know when, time immemorial, I guess. She's I was born and there she was. But when I think about the abuse of divorce court, I said, what does that really have to do with me? And then I think of Martin Niemöller, who said, first they came for the socialists, and I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't do anything. Then they came for the trade unionists. I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't do anything. Then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't do anything. And then they came for me, and there was no one left.
I would have been there.
Eloise would have been there. So, in some ways, whether you've been affected by divorce court abuse or not, Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so we're here tonight because we all share, we're all in this web somehow, and we actually need everybody's story to be told, not just Eloise's. We need to hear about all the injustices, and we need to see their connections. But even just tonight, on another part of the city, workers, low-wage workers are trying to come together to tell their story and gain some momentum. Right next door, right before this meeting, people in recovery were coming together to try to build some solidarity around how do we make it through another day and not die from the powers that be in the world. Tonight, poor people all around this place are going to be organizing, whether it's by 2 or 5 or 50, because, the fundamental reality is, if poor people don't organize themselves, they die. And some will die tonight. Some people will not live tonight because of the forces of poverty, addiction, violence, abuse, you name it. They will roll on. And so tonight, I really, respect everyone who comes out to keep thinking about these things, because they're big things to think about. They're not fun things to think about. They challenge us at some pretty deep levels, and it's great to be here. And I'll just end with one of the phrases that a few folks have helped me over the years think about. And I think because, as a social worker, I've probably done this to people like Eloise very often. So in my language, I will say, well, why don't you just go to DSS? And what I'm trying to do is actually take the word just out of my vocabulary. Because for me, just going to DSS probably means getting in my car as a white man, walking into DSS with all the privileges that come with it. Or if I say to somebody, why don't you just apply for disability, having no sense of what that might mean in terms of a person's humility or pride. Or if I say, why don't you just go talk to the manager, having no sense of maybe racial or gender politics that could cloud that encounter so quickly and the person ends up in jail for just advocating for their rights. Why don't you just go see your pastor, not knowing really anything about how that pastor is going to treat this person who comes to them? So for me, I'm not opposed to giving suggestions, but I've started to really try to rethink the word just. Because when I use that word in my life, it has so many assumptions around it. Eloise, why don't you just write a book? As if I know what the hell goes into that, And so I would invite us to maybe think about that as we're thinking about solutions, that why don't we maybe just stop from that word and try to think, what is it we're actually trying to think about here? And what does it mean for the people who are most affected by that decision? What will they have to do in order for this solution to come about? And how do we partner with a solution that makes sense to them?
And even though you take the word just out and you're sending them to these places for help, it's really going through another living hell. And they really need to have a person with them, sitting with them, speaking up for them. But what they're going to get in the end is a struggle. It's not going to be, you're not really sending them off to really get anything grand. And even in the subsidized apartments, they have different levels. So I found one I thought I'd really like in Silver Springs, Maryland. But I was $1,000 less a month. I was too poor for the poorhouse. And this was even with Habitat of Humanity. So they have different levels, even in Ithaca when I tried. Because I spend my money on my apartment, on my living space, and I was making $723, and my rent was $560, and my phone bill was $54, and I lived on $35 a month at the public market. And then I did have my good friend Mary who would help me. If she didn't give me $100 a month at that time, I would give her massages. I wouldn't have made it, but I wasn't going to go into the system and have them take my last drop of dignity when I know how hard I worked to try to get inside the crazy system. I mean, I went, it took me 15 years at NCC to unlock my academic mind that a school teacher tortured me so badly in 6th grade that I just shut everything off. And I spent thousands and thousands of dollars, and not just with one therapist, but many under him. And he told one of the therapists that came to me that he never had a patient that wanted to heal everything. So here I was, just ready to shine with the healing when the courts just pulled the rug under. But because I did all that work, I'm alive today. But if I didn't, I don't know where I'd be.
Eloise, I want to also just highlight that issue of anger, because I know from my own experience and lots of different experiences that anger can be an uncomfortable subject for people. And the more I work with people that have survived, the more I thank God all the time for anger, because I know many, many people for whom a real healthy fighting anger at injustice and at their lives is pretty much what has allowed them to live as long as they have lived under these experiences. I think it's so helpful, too, to spend, many of you are doing this work anyway, so this is not news to you, but we need to encourage people who don't enter into these realms to get into relationships and enter into these realms and have direct experience of them. I still remember doing advocacy for a young woman in Ithaca, and I just decided to spend one day with her, like all day. I just gave up my day, and I said, I'm going to spend the day with you. And she was trying to get a $35 check that she was owed through the system. And we spent all day. We started at 8:30 in the morning, and this is Ithaca, which has a pretty darn good social service system, and we trotted from office to office and meeting to meeting and this and to that, and they kept saying, go to this place and go to that place, and finally, at 4:30, as someone's closing a window, and the person behind the thing is saying, well, we can't find your file. It seems to be lost. And I just realized, just one day of that, I burst into tears, because I was so frustrated at 8 hours trying to get $35. And she just looked at me like she's comforting me, saying, this is okay, this is normal. I'm like, this is not normal. I think it's really good for us to viscerally experience that frustration of trying to do the most simple things to live. Because I think if we don't live that every day, we say those things like, just go do this. We don't understand how that can wear on a human soul. Day after day after day, year after year. But I would like to give all of you a chance to respond to Eloise and what you've heard.
Hi, my name is Joel. I'm multiracial, and I'm red, white, and blue all over. As far as the system goes, I've been on both sides of the fence. I've worked in hospitals and colleges and things like that, with the low end of the job as being a janitor, and I made my way through life through that. And I also had experiences with divorces and relationships and stuff like that, and I can really relate to what she's saying, because the race between society has become more of a gender of light-skinned people nowadays that are doing more. If you look around the city, like Monroe Avenue, they got a lot of people working, and there's not any multi-race people in them jobs or any black people that are working in the cities. And you know, most of the people in the cities that are black are way over on the other side of town, subject to drugs and alcohol, and most of their money's into it because their experience of life was taught to be that way. That's just my opinion, but I've been on both sides of the fence, and you know, I kind of know what society wants, and I kind of know what people who are free want too. That's all I got.
My name's Jen. What Eloise is doing is so important. About 10 years ago, I was escaping a domestic violence situation myself. I went through divorce court abuse myself, and Eloise and I have had long conversations about it, but the laws that are in our system are so bad for somebody who's going through this system. And I went through the ringer, and basically these domestic violence shelters, the best they can do is coach you through it. This is how you declare yourself homeless. This is how you apply for quote-unquote benefits. This is how you take your sick kids with you to the social services office and survive for the whole day while you wait for so-called benefits. This is how you go through this system that doesn't work. And this is how you apply for a court-ordered psychiatrist to deal with your mentally ill soon-to-be ex-husband and get a loan to pay for said thing. This is how you deal with a law guardian who isn't in the best interest for your children, it's in the best interest of whatever the child wants who's 8 years old. This is how you deal with all these things. This is how you get through it so you can apply for an apartment. But they can't actually do anything for you because our laws are all broken. And this is why what Eloise is saying and doing is so important. And this is why every time she pounds on that door for every politician, God bless you, woman. They're all afraid of her. You know, they all. And it's so very important because these laws have been there and been there and been there, and these advocates for domestic violence, the best they can do is push these people through the system. And something has to change. So I'm with you. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Lisa. Eloise, I'm so proud of you. I just went through a similar situation like that, and I do believe that our laws here in the United States are to help us fail, to not succeed. And I just recently received some paperwork from Office of Children and Family Services. And back in 2003, I had my children removed from my home because I was unstable. And in this paperwork, it states that my children were emotionally neglected. And I said, no, I was emotionally neglected due to our system. Because, see, I was adopted out of Monroe County adoption. I was that orphan. I was that homeless, childless child. And I didn't know any better. But yet, I wrote them a letter because my boss asked for this background information. I didn't. And knowing that I've learned to persevere, to not quit, to not give up, because I said, you know what, I wanted my children to have one sane, safe parent, and but through God's grace, they do have that today. But I also, in that letter, I paraphrase Micah 6:8, where it says, we love mercy, we seek justice, and we walk humbly. Because, Eloise, it is a you. It is a me that needs to be a voice in our nation to bring the justice. And Martin Luther, if I remember, says, the just shall live by faith. Faith cometh by hearing of the word, not by carnality. Thanks.
Here's probably an unanswerable question. Mike said to hear Eloise is to be converted, and certainly my heart is converted, but my behavior, I don't know how to approach that. What does it mean to be converted? How do we look different? And how do we act differently to be converted? What does that look like? And then a related question is, Eloise, as you can gather, has a passion to get the word out. And she's been talking with Helen Biandudi Hofer, the broadcaster from WXXI, who wanted to be here tonight but is ill. And I think Helen would like to do a story, but what does the story look like? What do we say? How can we assist in framing that story so it comes forth with a lot of clarity and power? So I don't know the answer to either of those questions. I think a partial answer to the first one is that Mike works in a health center for poor people. So there are structures that have been set up and are being set up as a kind of alternative world, where mercy rules. And we can do a lot better about that and create more alternative structures. And our churches are those things, very imperfectly, but they are. And so we can work to create a different society. We don't have to try to change the one that is, and always fight back against the almost undefeatable powers. We can create an alternative. And I think that is one thing that conversion looks like. And that's what conversion looks like.
I have a hard time with the word poor people because I've never felt poor. So I think if we say financially strapped or something, I think we would be thinking about the money more than the poor person. I still see myself as upper middle class. I don't know what else to tell you. I refuse to believe I'm poor. I've always had just enough to make ends meet. I can't explain it. Just enough. But I'd like to have more, My sons traveled to Europe and everything, so now I'm getting envious. When we have this world that we have, can you hold this? Our world is this small. So we can't dream. We can't dream about traveling even from state to state. I didn't have a car for 11 years. My sister's deathly ill. I risked it all and got myself a lease car. Then I couldn't afford the car in the apartment, so I slept in the car because I wanted to get to my sister's. And I can honestly say there's more freedom to have a car if you have to make both choices. I could get places. 11 years, I'm walking all around town. I could walk 30 miles in one day. But I was glad I could get to my sister, and she's nearing the end of life. And the system really sucked all her dignity. And over the years, all she would say to me was, I sold my soul. I sold my soul. And it hurts because they just sucked everything out of her. There's not enough to live on. But because I have this fight, that's what keeps me going strong. And I was on antidepressants for 15 years with my ex-husband, but as soon as I started the courts, I never needed a pill again because I knew I was being true to myself. And I'd rather sit on the curb than have them say they're giving me something when I knew they ripped everything away. And I never wanted to let that thought go from me because they ripped everything. And that was the last straw.
I don't know if you heard all of that, but I did learn a lot from Eloise about people who do make this decision to live in their cars, which a lot of people in Rochester do, because they would, they're just on the edge of maybe being able to pay for their apartment, but if they do that, they have nothing else whatsoever, including the ability to get around. And so they choose to keep a car and live in it, and then have just a little bit of disposable income to enjoy life. And what a horrible decision to have to make, but it's strangely logical.
If you think about it, going back to church when they said revive the old with the new, if you were able to do that with the system, somehow that might work to help people who aren't doing so well or doing as well. President Obama's theme was to take from the rich people a certain amount of money to help out the poor people, and they made a big issue out of that. But it's like a monopoly game, you know what I mean? The people who are getting richer keep getting richer, and the poor people get poorer. And when I used to play Monopoly, I used to give to the poor people and keep the game going. So it's kind of like you got to revive the old with the new.
Terrible Monopoly player. But I support your values.
I remember when they were going to have me play Monopoly, I just thought it was a disgusting game. I said, I can't play that game. So.
I understand. Please.
I think one of the things we have to think about is, so what are the underlying values that we've built these systems on, right? So we've built our public assistance system and things like that on these values that say, let's make this experience so unpleasant that nobody in their right mind will want to be here, and they will make other choices. Other places have made different decisions. In many countries in Western Europe, the values are communitarian values. Let's have people live at a level of dignity that they can afford to have a newspaper, they can afford to be transported, that they can afford to be part of the community, not apart from the community, not shunned by the community like the modern day lepers or something like that, so that they can make this flow, much more easily. Or in, the, in quotation marks, justice system that, I'm a part of, but we have an adversary system of justice, which is about fighting each other over dividing a finite pie. Is that the way the system has to be? There are alternative ways to deal with things, and thinking about things as not being finite pies, but about trying to find solutions that expand the pie and, make things better. And those solutions, I don't want to be too rosy about that. Those solutions are harder when there is unequal power and one person finds part of often his, but possibly sometimes her, self-worth in dominating other people. And I think the system has to be very thoughtful about how it responds to those situations. But these fundamental underlying decisions about how we structure and what are the values that underlie our system are, I think, the ones we need to look at. And I think Dick's idea about can we create alternatives to be models for the main system is a really smart one. And we need only go back to Acts, where we are told that the needs of everybody were met. And why? Because the people in those times were in small communities where they knew those needs, and they didn't transfer the responsibility of meeting those needs to large social organizations who really didn't know the people, right? And that's what we've done. Because of spatial, concentration, parishes couldn't take on all the responsibility when everybody in the parish was poor. And, the rich folks were out in the landed country and on their estates, galloping on their horses and chasing the foxes and like that. So rethinking those structures, rethinking those relationships, I think is part of it, and I think creating models that we can look at and say, these models are better than what we're doing now, because what we're doing now is crazy and hurts people.
That switch to the idea of values is where my mind was headed too, as we kind of move to a little bit of closure. But I want to have a little more discussion about that, because and it is biblical in my mind, and I had a whole different biblical approach in my mind, which acts as a wonderful one. But I was thinking about Ezekiel prophesying to the dead bones.
Oh.
So the prophet Ezekiel, goes into the valley of death, and they're dried and bleached up. And God says, prophesy to them and bring them back to life. And I think it's really significant that we need to speak different visions. And there's power in that. I'm sure every person in this room knows Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, right? There's power in naming an alternative reality and essentially calling it into being. And an alternative reality with alternative values, alternative purpose. And I wanted to give you all a chance to kind of do that a little bit tonight, and to talk about if we were to have true beloved community in the human family, what would that look like? How would we name that? How would we describe it?
Hi, my name is Fen. I've had reason to review not only my life, but several generations back lately. And there are certain events that were turning points. My father's father was a veteran of World War I, where he caught the Asian flu and died. After his wife was pregnant. So when my father was born, there was no father there. And his mother, in those days, was really stressed. There was no social services or backup that I know of. And she eventually gave up her son to some relative. I don't know what the relationship was. An engineer and his wife and their kids, and she tried to sort of find a shelter for my father. And then, but there was not only no social services, but more to the point, there was not really a community that had the strength and the vitality to step in or step along beside her and say, now you live in a greatly changed world, and we're going to help you make a healthy world to live in. And then the same thing happened when my parents divorced, and my mother was left with 3 kids, and I think it was $150 a month alimony. And she worked at minimum wages. I don't know what they were then, $1.50 or something. So we grew up beyond the divorce, desperately poor. And I think I can trace that now, how that affected my life and my older sister's life and my younger sister's life are all informed by these crises that happen sort of on a frontier of rugged individualism. Mm-hmm. Here's a family making it in the world, and now there's a crisis, and whoa, there's no one to help them. And so I know it's been addressed in the city of Rochester several years ago, maybe 20 years ago now, this thing of we need to change the whole society that relates to people in crises. And we need to be able to involve congregational life and medical life and educational things and shelter and food and counseling and so on. But I don't know that ever came to much. And I think when we say, what do we do in the future, I don't think they could manage that. I know there was some agency that evolved and then eventually split up, I think, over that, what to do. But I would say what we need to do is what we need to do in the crisis to limit the damage and to restart or reframe a new social place for these people. That's all.
Eloise, I came here tonight without really thinking about the topic much. I just came to hear what you had to say and to support you, and because a lot of my good friends are on the panel, and it just seemed like a good place to be tonight. And what I find is that you have, in your story, taken me back into my own story, which I do not like to share. How I was once the single mother of 3 small children living at ABW, and when you go to live at ABW, the first thing they do is send you down to DSS. And I hate those memories. I hate the memory of sitting at my worker's desk feeling like I was just a number, not even a person anymore. And I remember her getting up to do something and sitting there and defiantly pulling up the images of my children and of our life together, and that I was a person, damn it. I was a good person. I wasn't just a welfare recipient. And I managed to get out of that system, partly because I had the great good fortune to be doing this at a time when aid to families with dependent children still existed. And I don't think this could have been possible without that. And also because of some people I met along the way who believed my story and advocated for me. And because when I decided that there was no way I was going to get out of this situation without going to school, and I couldn't go to school unless I could pay for the things I needed to live on, and therefore I needed to get a job and go to school at the same time, which was going to be impossible. And I remember sitting again at somebody's desk, this time at a different IBC, what's that, Action for a Better Community. And that person listened to my story and said, you don't have to go to school and work. There's a program. And so I went to MCC, got a degree, and because I wasn't trying to work at the same time, had good enough grades to get hired over at the U of R, and we were off, and the kids went off to college eventually and all that sort of thing. And I look back on that time and I realized that I was a white person, I was an educated, middle-class person going through all of that. I had all kinds of help. I have a voice and I'm articulate and people will listen to me. How the heck does anybody navigate that system without all that stuff? No wonder people can't get out. I barely made it out with all these helps. The image that comes to me is like when you're in a pool. You ever had that situation where you're like trying to find the ground, and you're right, you're trying to keep your head above water, and your feet are trying to grip the side of the pool, and it's just so desperate. And I was lucky enough, I found the stairs, and I was able to climb the ladder and get out of there. But I'm thinking, how much I hate telling this story. And I hate for anybody to know that I used to be on welfare. And now I'm a together person. I got Reverend in front of my name, and so I can deny all of that. But that's part of the problem. Yeah. See, we've got this world that's like split into the together people and the people that are a mess. And we're not going to heal it until we can admit that we're all a mess. Every one of us is broken in some way. And we're all broken together, and we got to help each other. We got to help each other find that ladder, whatever it is. And believe it, just believe in the goodness of every person. Like I say, my heart just breaks when I think of the millions of women who were in the situation that I was in without the benefits of race and middle-class background and the education and all that stuff that I had going for me. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Eloise.
What time you got? Is it 8:30? Perfect. All right. I have sometimes for me when I think about visions of beloved community, my mind goes, I can't help but go to like radical places in my mind. Like, what if we just took all the money we spend policing social services and just opened centers everywhere where people could just come get whatever food they needed, get whatever help they needed, and the ones who wanted to work would figure out how to work, and the ones who didn't would survive and live with plenty of money, plenty to eat.
That was called Christianity.
Did you hear? He said that was called Christianity once. I mean, it would cost less than policing every tiny little thing, right? Like, what if, so I feel like that's why this deeper question of what we value that you brought up, Brian, really matters, because we need to get out of our fear and our scarcity and our urge to police each other and our urge to be right or wrong, or our urge to be in the together category versus the not together category, and just say, how do we make a sensible community where everyone can live and thrive? And we don't have to tell them how to live and police how they live. So many people want to blossom, want to grow. They don't want to spend all day crawling around to get $35 from social service agency. That's not how they want to spend their days. I think we have to talk that kind of a vision into the world together, and help folks that want to police everybody to just think a little bit bigger. A little more, in a more compassionate and loving way toward our sisters and brothers, because we're one family. Yeah, I want to give Eloise a word, and then we'll close up.
And I know that if people could just be who they were, the gifts that they were giving, everyone is amazing. And if everyone were where they belong, everyone would say, you're amazing, because we all have different places to be. And if a person's acting amazing, you know they're right where they belong. So I just want to see a world where everybody can be where they belong. I feel like the academic system sometimes, as much as it's helping, has caused problems. Because there are people already on the 10th level because they've been working on where they belong with their gift all their life, but they're not going to be able to make a good salary on it because they don't have the piece of paper to go with it. So I'll shut up. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight.
Let's give Eloise a hand.
I'm going to leave, if you want to put your address and email so I can get back to you, because I want to do something with this activistly, but I'm not sure what. I didn't write it out clearly yet. So, thanks.
Oh, yeah, so here.
I got some.
So we're going to hear a beautiful song, and that will be our closing. And then when that's done, Eloise has a table back there with her books, and she's going to be signing them, and they're $15. I'd like to encourage you to give further donation if you're able to, and she'll be there to chat with you. And I want to thank our panelists very much for being here tonight. We're so grateful that you came out tonight. Thank you. So I introduce you to Melissa and Mike Boyack, who are going to sing us out tonight.
Hi, thank you. We're going to close the evening with a song called Orange Sky by Alexi Murdoch.
Well, I had a dream I stood beneath an orange sky. Yes, I had a dream I stood beneath an orange sky. With my brother standing by. With my brother standing by. I said, brother, you know, it's a long road we've been walking on. Yes, it is, yes, it is. Brother, it is. Such a long road we've been walking on. Oh, brother. Well, I had a dream I stood beneath an orange sky. With my sister standing by. With my sister standing by. I said, here's what I know now, sister. Here's what I know now, goes like this. In your love, my salvation lies. In your love, my salvation lies. In your love, my salvation lies. In your love, in your love, in your love. Oh, but you know I am so weary. And you know my heart's been broken down. Sometimes my mind is too strong to carry on. Too strong to carry on. Oh, but when I'm alone, when I've thrown off the weight of this crazy storm, when I've lost all care for the things I own, that's when I miss you. That's when I miss you, you who are my home. You who are my home now. I said, here's what I know now, brother. Here's what I know now, sister, goes like this. In your love, my salvation lies. In your love, my salvation lies. In your love, my salvation lies. In your love, in your love, in your love. In